Hi, welcome to another TOG chat. I'm Bob Osborne, principal of the Osborne Group. I'm joined by my colleague Laurel McCombs, senior philanthropy advisor for the Osborne Group. Hi, Laurel.
Hello.
We're here. We're back for another TOG chat. And so today I thought we would talk about social media. I don't know that we've ever really talked about that before. And what got me thinking about it was just recent conversations I've had with clients who seem to misunderstand like the utility of social media. And I'm not saying that it doesn't have a utility, but maybe misunderstand like what that utility is and how we can most use it most effectively. And so you and I haven't talked about this before. Not totally even sure what your opinions about this are. So we're just gonna jump in and wing it. I'll kick it off by just saying I think the research that's out there is pretty clear that that just in terms of straight up fundraising, that social media is, the numbers are not, I think you said in the last TOG chat, like are just not what we thought it would be, right? Like we really thought that this would be this big thing. And I remember, a while back, helping a friend with a crowdfunding campaign. And we really organized it, and it was launched at the same time across Twitter, across Facebook, across a bunch of other social media platforms. We had a bunch of people all doing it. I think we got 3 million impressions in the first 24 hours. And I did the calculations afterwards, and I can attribute raising $400 directly to that blitz, and maybe another 400 that possibly were raised by that, but maybe weren't. And I think that's very indicative in many ways about the direct impact that social media has on fundraising. And so yeah, so that's been my experience. But again, I do think there's things that we can do with social media. But curious about what your experience has been and your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag, right? Like there's no, there for every 10 stories that I hear like yours, I hear the one, right? That's like, yeah, but we did this, campaign and it went viral and it, did all this amazing things. The thing with social media is it's not predictable, right? And so, no one can make a viral, you can't make a viral video, right? Like I can't go make a video and be like, this one's going to be viral, right? Like this is going to be the one. But what I will say is where I think social media has had some impact in fundraising is in peer-to-peer, is in people at using social media to reach out to their own people about things.
Mm.
I also think, interestingly, when we look at and folks should go check out our last TOG chat about trust, impact, and engagement. Where we are seeing some competition for nonprofit dollars is in fact in crowdfunding, right? Is in fact in people saying, hey, my house burned down and
Mhm.
I need to raise some money, and people saying, hey, my friend's house burned down, will you give them some money? And so I think in that way, social media has been quite effective in terms of raising money, just not for the nonprofit sector, right? But the power of that use of social media is in the personal. It's in, I'm helping my friend, or can you help my friend, right? And I think similarly, when we've seen organizations do good peer-to-peer campaigns, where people are, setting up teams and going out and raising money to do a walkathon or, whatever it is, that can be impactful too. The piece of it that I think is missing on the nonprofit sector side is we're not always good when we're doing those peer-to-peer campaigns at capturing names, at actually acquiring those donors as long-term donors. We do a lot of churn and burn with those donors, which, kind of from a long-term return on investment standpoint makes you wonder whether or not that's the best use of our time. But that's kind of my mixed bag, I guess, of social media.
Yeah, and a question I've always had too, when folks are maybe a little less intentional about their social media than some other groups, is what is the overlap between your social media followers and your actual donors. And I don't know the answer to that. My instinct is most of the time that they may be completely different people. Like when I think about my own Instagram feed, I follow probably more clients, frankly, than I follow folks that that I give to. Now, I do follow some that I give to, but I wonder about that a little bit. But I also, can give like a good example. I mean, Save the Children. So I live in the West Village in New York, and there's constantly street teams around here, getting you on the street and trying to get you to donate. And my resistance rate is like 99%. But one day Save the Children got me, and I was feeling, they just got me on the right day, and I signed up. And they do a really excellent job of using social media. In this case, they like text and pictures and social media to engage me. And I'll be honest, I don't always read it or look carefully at it, but I'm very aware of it. And I'm very like, oh, they're doing things. And they do it in a way that it doesn't really require you having to read very much of it. It's a picture, it's a tweet, it's something that is easily absorbed. And so I am struck that from like a stewardship standpoint, if you can, in capturing the information from your donors, maybe proactively encouraging them to engage with you over social media could be potentially very effective if we're intentional about that, and we really make sure that we are mapping our donors to our social media and in an intentional way, rather than just kind of mentioning that it exists and kind of hoping that people sign up for it. I'm wondering, for the organizations that you give to, do you find that you follow them on social media, or is there a disconnect between those two things?
I mean, there's probably a disconnect between those two things. Like I mean, let's be very honest about Laurel's social media usage. Like I use social media in very specific ways, right? So most of my social media is YouTube. And so the way to get to me from a donor perspective is through influencers, right? If someone I watch and someone I like on YouTube is advocating for a cause, I'm going to perk up my ears, right? And I'm going to perk up my ears to what they're talking about and how they're talking about it because of the business I'm in, right? So on all levels, I find it really fascinating the way organizations are utilizing influencers, whether it's on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, right? I think there's that potentially is the real frontier of social media, and the same way we've always looked at using brand ambassadors, right? Even before social media, the way we the way you use community leaders and other people of influence in your community to kind of be an ambassador for your organization. But I do think, kind of going back to this idea of how people are messaging just their own social media, I also think there's a weird, like, we tend to, I know that in marketing and communications, we need to segment our audiences, and we talk a lot about that. But ultimately with social media, like, we're pushing out a message, and I think sometimes we make assumptions about like what the world does and doesn't want to hear. And I think there's always this like hesitation to put donor messages on our social media. And I think, well, who's not a donor potentially that's reading your messages? And are you, to your point, kind of fracturing your donor audience away from your social media by not doing more? And again, I'll point to the last TOG chat that we did on trust, engagement, and impact. And I think, what if those were the three goals for our social media? Right? Like, what if we approached our social media from the perspective of how are we using it to build trust in our organization? How are we using it to demonstrate the impact that our organization is having? And how are we actually using it to engage people and not just push out one-way communication to folks?
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, yes to all of that. I really like the last one, because the real strength of social media, right, is supposed to be that engagement, right? It's supposed to be the back and forth, and yet most of the time it is kind of most of the information is flowing in one direction. And that is to some extent the nature of, again, like how we use social media in reality. And so I like that lens and thinking about it, because you're probably better off in engaging a smaller number of people, right, than kind of broadcasting to a wider group of people that are not particularly engaged, who are just kind of seeing it and glancing at it. If you had a small number of people that were super active with your social media, but those were folks who were donors or potential donors, there's probably real value in that. Otherwise, I think it kind of falls more into the category, right, of marketing and brand. And there's value in that. Like, just to be clear, I don't think what we're saying is like there's not a value in social media, but it's really like how do we use it, and what are realistic expectations? And I think the realistic expectation that the way we tend to use it as a sector falls much more into like broad marketing, long-term strategic, just creating an impression, creating a brand, in a way that's only going to pay off in terms of fundraising as like background, and then just making it easier to do some of the other fundraising that we do. But like most marketing, right, you can spend a lot of time and a lot of money on it, and it's this very broad approach that takes time. And I think a lot of times we expect it to be much more like, this is fundraising, right? This is an appeal. This is like, and it just doesn't act that way most of the time, I think. And so it's just, I'm struck how often I'll see an organization that has hired a social media person, before they hire like someone to cover their mid-level giving, for instance, or start a sustainer program. Like, it, again, it has its place, but what is the strategy that's involved, as opposed to, I feel like we should just have a social media person.
Well, and
I don't
then,
know what your
yeah, well, and then how are people measuring the return on investment, right? So,
I'm pretty sure most of them aren't measuring it, but you tell me if
right. Yeah,
if
like how do we
that's the
even
case.
know? So we're going to invest, staff time and energy, or even investing volunteer time and energy into something like this, and not somehow, first and foremost, actually set a goal, right? Have we even set a goal? Like, to your point, is our goal just brand recognition? And if that is, great. How are we going to measure it? If our goal is to just have more impressions and get our name out, and how often we hear people after the fact saying, well, but it really helps get our name out in the community. And I think, okay, well, that's great. It's the excuse people use about events all the time. And I think, no, that's great. But was that at the front end your goal? Or are you just now, because it didn't hit your fundraising goals, now you're saying, well, but it does this thing? And so I'm not saying that, to your point, like brand impressions, all of that is good if that is in fact what we want it to accomplish. But if we're expecting it to accomplish other things, then let's be really strategic about setting a goal, measuring progress to that goal, and then setting strategy that gets us to that specific goal. And so I think that, I always think back to like, you and I are old enough to remember the roots of social media, right? And I think about, kind of the intention and the freedom that it was supposed to give, right? To be a content creator, to be able to put your own words out into the world, whether it was, written word or video or whatever it might be. And yet, I think a lot of organizations put really strict parameters around their social media. And I'm not saying don't have social media policies and guidelines. I'm not saying let people do whatever they want to do on your social media. But I think, going back to the roots of what made social media so special in the beginning, which was letting people express themselves and their feelings about the world, and being a little looser and letting people do that with your social media. And I think that's part of, engaging folks, like letting people become content creators for you, letting people, through your social media, share their experiences and feelings and, thoughts about the work. Again, not saying just let anybody say whatever they want on your social media, but I see a lot of organizations that I think have put maybe too tight of a rein on their social media, and have really kind of squelched what makes social media a powerful tool to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting thought because, yeah, we're all terrified, right? Um, of saying the wrong thing, and the risk, the brand risk involved with that is high, and so I think you're right. But I can also think of organizations that are more transparent, and again, it's not that they don't have any parameters, but are more open to that level of engagement, and are open to that, loosening that up a little bit, that have, you're right, use that really, more effectively, I would say, than organizations that are not, because they do have that genuine back and forth, and they have created a sense of community, right? Like that's the ideal that we're looking for here. If it's done right, we've created a community of people who care about what we do, and have our same values, and communities tend to police themselves too, right? Like you can have people, at a certain scale, it gets hard, right? And I would say, I guess that's maybe a high quality problem to have for for organizations that have it. But I think for your average not for profit, we're not operating at such a huge scale that that we can't, you know, police it a little bit, and have the community police itself on some level. So I think that's an interesting thought. An interesting thought. Anything else you wanna add? I think this has been a good conversation. What haven't we covered?
Yeah, I guess the one big, elephant in the room that we haven't talked about is Giving Tuesday, and kind of the you can't really talk about social media and fundraising without talking about Giving Tuesday, right? It's kind of the hallmark of social media. And to that, I would just kind of echo what we've said, which is, I'm never going to tell somebody, yes, you absolutely have to do Giving Tuesday, or no, you should absolutely not. I think it's a decision that everybody makes on their own. I think we see the entire range of people who are wildly successful with Giving Tuesday and kind of stand out as the like, wow, well, we could do that, right? But then we also see people who see nothing coming on Giving Tuesday, right? And again, I think success on Giving Tuesday, success on any other Tuesday with social media comes down to being really explicit about the goal, the outcomes that you're expecting, and how you're going to measure progress toward those outcomes, and then building a strategy that actually works toward that. This is just, it's not a if you build it, they will come thing, right? It
You're
just
exactly
putting a,
right.
putting a thing up, putting a tweet up, or putting something on your Instagram that just says, hey, we're doing Giving Tuesday, isn't going to drive millions of dollars to your organization. And so, like everything else, like my entire mantra this year, trust, engagement, impact, with your social media strategy too. Are you working toward those goals, and are you being explicit about it?
Exactly. And there you have it, folks. You don't have to do social media unless you have a plan and a purpose to it. And it's okay. There are other things that I think you and I would put on the hierarchy of getting in place before you necessarily get your social media game together. Once the basics are in there, I think you and I are totally fine with it. But and again, it's just managing those expectations, and like you said, trust, impact, and now I'm forgetting the
Engagement.
trust, impact, and engagement.
It'll become your mantra too
It's a
soon.
Friday afternoon, folks. Yes. So, well, anyway, I think this has been a really good talk. And we hope that you will join us for the next TOG chat. But until then, thanks again.